Hello, everyone, and David should be here in a minute. I got my fire hat on for the emergency. It seems like here we go. He's over there.
Hi, John.
Preparing your beverage.
My wonderful bottle of Northern mineral water. Let me. It's been a trying day.
He does here. Okay, well, my bad. It takes so much time to prepare for this show that I sometimes forget to send you a link.
I wouldn't worry, John. I wouldn't worry.
No, I think we've proven that neither of us are very inclined to worry at least when it comes to this podcast.
I think the podcast is functioning very, very well.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
And, people like it, and yeah. I like to think that we're at least putting something out there in pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Amen. Amen.
Given that the title of our program is "What is Truth," all we need to do is add the good and the beautiful. And
well, you're clearly the beautiful, John.
Yeah, I got a beautiful sense of humor. But what's going on here? Oh, look out. I just knocked over some books. It's been kind of rough and tumble.
You've been poorly, and much more poorly than I realized.
Well, yeah, I just got to go through a cleansing, and I'm back. But did you catch my podcast with Douglas the other day?
I caught the one about freedom.
Yeah. Well, that was mine. That was that short little 15-minute or 16-minute thing. Well, no, I did one with Douglas. What is Cosmic Intelligence? Our 12th installment of that.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, it'd be kind of nice if you had heard that, and it would give you a kind of a context to think about what I might say, but I always have to strategize several different pathways in which I could pursue this. And I was in the middle of, excuse me while I belabor a point here and say hello to everybody. Yes, hi everyone from around the world. So anyways, getting back to, I get up about 4 in the morning and I start deciding, okay, well, what might I talk about? Not that it'll actually be relevant to what we actually talk about, but it's a nice gesture. But we did a show the other day, last Thursday, being that's the Ascension Festival. And so we discussed the transition from the Festival of Ascension to Pentecost.
Yeah. And
how Rudolf Steiner characterizes the meanings. Again, he doesn't like to paint something into some kind of mental construct, but approach subjects from very different perspectives. And it's much more artistic approach, so to speak. And in fact, we discussed the ramifications of that whole artistic way of looking at things. And he says, I'm just going to paraphrase here because I don't feel like looking for the quote, because of course we're not talking so much about things that I was preparing this morning. And so, but anyways, to go back to this idea is that when one presents something conceptually, you get boxed in by your mental construct, because your abstract thinking is your description of your mirror image of what your sensory apparatus is perceiving from the material world in your experience. And so you're getting a description of an image of the world. But the great difficulty in that image is it's incomplete, because it's just the pertaining to the physical sense apparatus mental process. And that doesn't necessarily include the soul and spirit levels of your nature. And so that's basically the rub, and that the abstract modern scientific worldview, although it does have incredible applications in the material world, cannot solve anything that's beyond just the mineral realm. And the mineral realm would be that kind of mechanical world view that is so popular in the world of science, but yet can't even enter into the realm of even the plants, let alone the animals, let alone what is a human being. And so in looking at that, Rudolf Steiner approached the festival of the Ascension from the standpoint, he said, and I paraphrase, that Earth evolution had gotten to a point to where it was so into decline because of the strivings of the fallen Luciferic and Ahrimanic or Satanic spirits of materialism. And Luciferic is the infinitely proud realm. And that those two forces that had, through their interaction with mankind, Earth evolution was getting to the point to where it could literally come to an end. That we would have an incomplete mission as far as being able to become spirits of freedom and love out of the physical being. And it's that relationship between the physical body and the etheric body of memory and life forces, and that which streams from the sun and the etheric world, that aspect of it and the relationship between the two of them was remedied through the mystery of Golgotha. And so that even for beings, humans that didn't accept anything about the mystery of Golgotha, nonetheless, they would have the opportunity to continue on with an intact physical and etheric constitution to be able to incarnate into. And so that the ascension is in a sense an admonition, because it's like saying, the etheric body could just follow its strivings and go into this sun realm and just leave Earth altogether, this fallen ash of physicality. And that's like not such a good thing, shall we say. And Christ, through the mystery of Golgotha, was able to fix that. And so we all have that. But he says, but the Pentecost, which is 7 Sundays after Easter, and in the festival of Pentecost, with the tongues of flame coming down on the heads of the apostles and them being able to speak the language of all things, and the Langvert, the green language, the language of the heart, that is through the realm of feeling is able to convey content to anybody of any language, right? And so, but he says, but the mystery of Pentecost has to do with the fact that if you dedicate yourself to this mystery of Golgotha, this Christ stream, that what ends up happening is that in your astral and etheric, whereas in the ascension was pertaining to the physical and the etheric relationship, but in Pentecost, the astral and the ego are involved in the process that results from one's dedication to the mystery of Golgotha, that while one is in the realm of sleep, that you gain this revivifying power from the intervention of Christ into your life, and you allowing him in. You know, it's like the bride and the bridegroom, like that used to be described in the Middle Ages, like someone like, say, Bernard of Clairvaux. And so you have this whole idea of being able to bring about this chemical wedding of the realms of soul and spirit with the physical and etheric. And that is what's going to be leading us forward in Earth evolution as we unfold into spirits of freedom and love. So that's kind of some of the substance of what we were discussing. How are you today?
I've unexpectedly had a pressurized day because the online Persian Christian fellowship that I preach to once a month decided to visit London, and they wanted to see my chapel. So unexpectedly, my partner and I had to rush down there and show them about and sort of have fellowship with them. So, yeah, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful. But at the same time, it was an unexpected addition to everything else I have to do on a Sunday. So I'm feeling frazzled, and I'm feeling overworked, and I'm feeling the need to sort of get my bearings and also get back into the flow of this show, which I sort of missed. I mean, last Sunday, excuse me, was my fault, and I confess it. I was just so tired I couldn't do it. So it was as simple as that. How am I? Gosh. Where am I? I mean, I love metaphysics, and I love the poetry of metaphysics, even when it's denied. That's not poetry, that's metaphysics. Actually, there's a very clear demarcation between the two. And in many ways, poetry is vastly superior to metaphysics. Therefore, when I hear about the bridegroom and the bride in terms of Christ and his church, I suppose I want to say something along the lines that that's all well and good, but if the church is a bride, she is a sinful bride, and also she has committed adultery. Therefore, I don't think it's actually going too well at the moment. In what, throwing out the baby with the bathwater is not the way to keep a relationship going. What have I got in mind there? I mean, people know I'm from that sort of independent, stroke liberal, stroke theosophical, stroke anthroposophical Catholic current. So I feel very comfortable in talking about metaphysics and the mystical. And one of the reasons I love this show so much and regard you as a good chum. But all right, how often does the church actually do that these days when it's not me and you doing it? I mean, and let's face it, there are too many unqualified social workers in the church. If you want to be a social worker, be a social worker. Get a proper wage, do the degree, and do it properly. And if you want to be, I don't know, some sort of buildings administrator, do it. Don't pretend you're a cleric. So I don't know. I'm sort of disgruntled about the whole thing at the minute. On the first level, I think the social gospel is more important than ever in our present circumstances, which I can't believe I'm saying. I was always the Grinch in terms of the social gospel. Why do we always have to talk about the social gospel? Why do we always have to talk about the social gospel? Single mums and lack of housing. Why do we have to talk about the social gospel? And now it's me. Why aren't we talking more about the social gospel? So that's a 360-degree turn, but not at the expense of why we're all there. I mean, I put something on Facebook the other day, liberal Catholicism. Right, this is where I get in trouble with everybody. My concerns about Protestantism as it's turning into, I think everybody knows I've got this sort of gigantic admiration for the original reformers. And we've got to remember they said they were reformers. They didn't say they were Protestants. That comes later. When the argument simply wasn't going to be resolved, that's when, at least nobody was trying to resolve it in a meaningful way. That's when those churches start saying, okay, we're now in protest. We're protesting against the lack of genuine communication here. And that's when Protestantism arguably starts. So they're now in protest. They're now in protest against the lack of dialogue. And of course, evangelicals come a lot later than that. So, I mean, with the deepest respect to them, they were nowhere to be seen in the days of Luther, in the days of Calvin, in the days of Zwingli. I mean, let's face it, you know, you weren't there. You weren't there. So, you know, and then they come along trying to tell everybody they're in the wrong. Why don't you just buck off, right? I did say buck, so nobody need lose any sleep. It was tempting to say the other version, but no, buck will do. My trouble with that type of Protestantism and the other churches, Protestant churches, are also sadly beginning to go in that direction, is that they're trying to reduce everything to an argument, to a formula, to a philosophical view, to an ideology. But is that really why we're all there? You know, so, you know, what's liberal Catholicism for me? Encountering a mystery. Why do priests go on about rituals? Because you're trying to engage in the type of consciousness that gave that scenario, that gave that event, that gave that symbolic depiction life in the first place. You know, when I'm taking Mass, I very rarely conduct Mass for practical reasons as well as more highfalutin reasons. I conduct communion very, very often, but not Mass. The commemorative meal, I think, is equally as important in all sorts of ways. But, you know, Mass is meant to be the step above because you're encountering his presence. And by the way, all you Protestants out there, Martin Luther would not have denied that during communion, the real presence was there. He talks about it. So, you know, my trouble with all of this really is that we're dealing with a church that's in an adulterous state. Roman Catholicism has been in free fall since the Second Vatican Council. The Roman Church, and this is said with love to all my friends in the Roman Church. What I'm saying is said with love to all my friends in the Protestant churches. Please, please, please don't get me wrong, anybody. You know, a little light modernity, in other words, was shone on the activities of the Roman Church and all its obscurantism. And yes, it was guilty of that. And it's basically been in free fall ever since because it hasn't maintained the mystery. Well, hang on. Alexandrian Catholics have managed to do it. My lot have managed to do it. So why haven't you lot managed to do it? You know, what we're doing is going over the same territory week in and week out. We don't want, excuse me, I might have to have some more mineral water in a minute. We don't want endless innovation during Sunday worship. We want to retrace our steps. We want to walk with the apostles again. We want to visit Golgotha. We want to see, oh, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? I'm not saying anything. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, but you've got to look at what's in front of you, right? Because what's in front of you is important. Again, we want to see the ascension for ourselves. We want Pentecost. I'm going to say two things to round off my point quickly. The last statement of Christ is the ascension. Pentecost is something else. That's the Holy Spirit. I mean, I know you don't like Zizek, but I rather like Zizek. He likes Christians. I think he's an atheist. You know, he's one of those people where it's so complicated, I'm not sure even he can work out what he means by atheist anymore. So he, you know, something. And he says what he likes about Christianity is what happens is, you know, does our good Lord return? No, but Pentecost comes along and the community of righteousness. A brave attempt to live Mount Zion values, a brave attempt to live ahead of time, as we will all live in the after the general resurrection in the risen state. And as an aside, because we get the paranormal in here somehow too, my brother had been tanked up a couple of years ago. We all know loads of Persians. It's a different story. And there was a conversation going on in the middle of the night where he heard everything they were saying. Yeah, the old tanked up, I'm drunk and I'm not listening and I passed out routine. Done it myself as a student. You know, and there was something he didn't agree with, and he chimed up and said, well, that's wrong. And they both nearly had thrombies because they said, my God, we're speaking in Iranian. How did you know what we were saying? So that phenomena does happen. But is that what the Bible is talking about? Or are they talking about something more? I think you're completely correct. They're talking about that paranormality, but they're also talking about something more, infinitely greater worth and value. So, we're looking at that sort of thing. And we're also looking at what do ascension values live for us in a world with an adulterous church. I'll tell you one thing I think Catholics are good at. We don't hide our sins and misdemeanors. Proddies do. It all goes on in the Protestant churches and you all brush it under the carpet. We don't. So I'm sticking up for us lot for once. Point one, there's no point doing it because it normally all goes to court and everybody's suing everybody. Rather like that wonderful trial between Amber Heard and the young career builder Johnny Depp. I mean, I haven't been following it religiously, pun intended. The other side of my screen has just frozen, so I'm hoping John is still there and at least having a little humour. No, he's disappeared. Oh my God, this is where I panic. Right. I've been following a little of it simply because I've never seen an open gold digger attack a manifest career builder in public space before. And I'm hoping the career builder wins. What an odious woman. But that's a separate thing. So I'm on your side, Johnny. We love you, Johnny. And have you seen every time he goes in with his entourage to the court every day, playing reggae music and blowing kisses out the window? I mean, this is medievalism. I'm sorry. This is the prince rides to the local assize. But all great stuff. So what am I thinking of at the moment in terms of Christianity? I'm thinking very clearly of Pentecost. For me, that's the church building stage. And what are we building when we're building church? Are we building buildings? Are we building communities? Are we building worship spaces? What are we building? And for me, it must be all of those, or it's not church. For Swedenborg, of course, we were building a state of mind. We were building an epoch. But I think that's a little too idealistic to talk about directly. And also we're talking about the ascension, which is so mind-boggling. Is it some guy floating into the clouds? I think anyone that thinks that simply hasn't seen the glory in that story and the transdimensionality implied by that story. And the fact that our good Lord, after the resurrection, I'm going to get openly mystical because I'm tired today, so I'm not hiding it. All of a sudden,
it's about time.
Oh no, there are too many people doing it the wrong way. Like that young Gentison, is he Baptist? I can't remember. Billy Graham's grandson or something. And it always leads to a plug for his new book. I've noticed that. And that young Fertig, I like him because he came up with that. Well, you've got a stage, I didn't say altar, you've got a stage loads of people jigging about and singing. Great, I'm just jealous. I wish we could do that at our place. But no, I'm just sort of, I'm wary of that. But let's look at what happened. I mean, you have a carpenter, you have the Son of God, you have the Messiah, you have the King of Israel. They're not necessarily the same thing. Until the resurrection, all of those identities worked in 3 dimensions. They obeyed the laws of physics as we understand them. They adhered to the system of the world as it was. That's not what the risen Christ is like. He passes through walls, but not in the fashion of a ghost. He eats, but doesn't eat because various processes are still taking place. You have almost like a 4-dimensional reality invading a three-dimensional reality. You know, something else is going on. One minute he's here, then another minute he's there. Time and space have lost their definitive presence in his life. And he's on the ground, then he's not on the ground. I mean, strange, beautiful stories, which for me, of course, are much more than stories and are suggesting very heavily of what the new man, which of course he's the firstborn fruit, what the new man, what the new woman will actually be like when we're getting back into the original glories promised by the Creator at the creation. What do you make of all that, John? I'll have a sip of mineral water to stop me gagging.
Caught me off guard. Never fails. Well, yeah, I think if you want to get into what Rudolf Steiner would point at as to some of the subjects you brought up, it's interesting that it dovetails part of my research leading up to the show. And so there's a lecture cycle that I thought I had it laying. Oh yeah, here it is. Dying Earth and Living Cosmos, the living gifts of anthroposophy, the need for new forms of consciousness. And but this is from an earlier version of a portion of that book that was put out. It's called The Sound Outlook for Today and a Genuine Hope for the Future. Lecture 6, Problems of the Time, number 1. It was back in July 30th of 1918 in Berlin. And so herein he says, and it completely surrounds all the things that you just pointed at. And he says, there are 3 currents through which their inward relationship had the greatest power of destruction in human evolution, due to their having absorbed the inherited and the new in different ways. First among them is what I call Americanism, which tends to produce greater and greater fear of the spirit, making the world a mere opportunity for living in the physical. It is quite different when Britain wants to make the world into a kind of commercial market. Americanism would make it a physical dwelling equipped with all possible comfort in which man can lead an agreeable and wealthy life. That is the political creed of Americanism. And whoever does not detect it is blind to the facts and merely shuts his eyes and ears. Man's connection to the spiritual is bound to die out under such an influence. In these forces of Americanism lies what must actually bring the earth to an end, destruction dooming it at last to death, because the spirit will be shut out from it. The second destructive element is not only that of Catholicism, but all Jesuitism, which in essence is virtually allied to Americanism. If the latter is the cultivation of the impulse to build up fear of the spirit, so the former, the Jesuits, seeks to awaken the belief that one should not seek contact with the spirit, which it deems impossible. It wishes spiritual blessings to be dispensed by those who are called into the teaching office of the Catholic Church. This influence seeks to atrophy forces in human nature, which incline to the supersensible. The particular indications of the third stream can be seen arising in a terrible form in the East, a social state based on a purely animal, physical socialism. Without plastering of dogmas, we'll call it Bolshevism, and it will not easily be overcome by mankind. These are 3 distinctive elements in modern development of humanity, to bring our knowledge to bear upon them, so that the events of the present day may be met in the right way. It is possible only through spiritual science. And so that's from Collected Works, Volume 181, and that addresses all the various aspects regarding what you were saying. And you see that. I mean, geez, now you look at the way in which this whole world structure that's attempting to unfold, and the alliance between, you know, like this whole Chinese methodology of society and its relationship to the Catholic Church, which really goes all the way back to Marco Polo. And so you have this, but what is that? And when you get into it, you realize that the Roman Empire was established in 747 BC. And the ages of the Platonic Great Year of 2,160 years each. And so you have 2,160 years after that is 1413, 1414. And something really significant regarding what you were just discussing happened right at that time. And that was Jan Hus. And Jan Hus he's like the prototype in many regards of Protestantism, in that he was the predecessor, and the Hussites and the Bohemian Brothers and that whole impulse that came out of Czechoslovakia. But he was born in around 1372, and he died on the 6th of July, 1415. So we're talking about an event that happened just after the beginning of where are we here? I'm trying to find it. Yeah, here. Just after the beginning of our current age of the consciousness soul. And but he was burned at the stake. And in regards to that, sorry, I have to jump all over all these things here. Where is it? Okay. But they burned him at the stake. And in the last moment, the Imperial Marshal von Pappenheim, in the presence of the Count Palatine, asked Hus to recant, to save his own life. And Hus declined, and he said, "God is my witness that the things charged against me I never preached. In the same truth of the gospel, which I have written, taught, and preached, drawing upon the sayings and positions of the holy doctors, I am ready to die today." And so you have this whole just willingness to represent the supersensible. And he also had made a prophecy that he was just the goose, but that the swan will come, and he gave the number of years. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but that was the time frame in which Martin Luther appeared. And he said that you've got me, I am just the goose, but in however many years, the swan will come and you will not be able to stop him. And that was Martin Luther. So you have that whole Protestant impulse, and you get this unfolding of this drama regarding the relationship of the individual. And the consciousness soul period's all about the individual, but the individual as a earthly being, you know, that we're so connected to the earth, just as the consciousness soul relates to the physical, the intellectual soul of the period just preceding it relates to the etheric body, and before that, the sentient soul to the astral organization. And so you have this unfolding of the form in Christianity opening up, and you have all the series of conferences, but this is all like legalism and you know, theology and law, and it's that whole realm of the physical dominant thinking, the abstract thinking. And so you see, in response to that, the impulses of spiritual science, what are they? They're artistic. They're not like a theological court. And so you have that which can meet our future evolution arising out of the realm of the arts. And Rudolf Steiner actually even specifically points towards music as being a very important role as far as giving mankind the impetus to move toward a wholesome development. And so you see all the artistic activity that takes place around the Goetheanum and all of that. And he says when you express something with an image, it leaves you free. Whereas if it's in a concept, then you can go, oh, okay, I got that figured out, and you park that concept over here in concept category 8 or whatever. But yet you can't do that with art. And so there's this living relationship to a painting or a piece of instrumental music specifically, or sculpture or what have you, that it's continually questioning you to bring about it within your own being something to meet it that becomes your inner content. So that's kind of some of the things that come to my mind after what you said.
I've missed this show. I've missed this show. First of all, I've got to protest myself. Oh, wouldn't that be great? I wonder if that actually happened. Martin Luther stood in the ecclesiastical court with his hand on a pile of books. Here I stand. Oh my God, wouldn't that be wonderful? I want to do it. I want to do it. This is one for your attention. One of the most depressing books I've read in bloody years. And it's all on the way. We're getting medievalism back without the interesting bits, without the architecture, without the art, without the paintings. And it's worth a look for anybody who's interested in social trends, the diminution of cultural forces, the deliberate, some would say, restriction of creativity itself, maybe. I mean, on a personal level, I was always attracted slightly more to anthroposophy. I mean, I think I did more years on the coalface in theosophy, but I was more attracted to theosophy as a principle, as an idea, because of the artistic associations. And of course, it was them I ended up rejoining. I think anthroposophy's this treasure trove that it doesn't really understand yet of how deeply enriching that cultural movement actually is. And the fact it's looking towards creatives and creativity to take the next step forward. I see my friend John has now ducked out of the screen again. I'm sorry, I panic. What makes me sad is they tend to ossify art to the time when Rudolf Steiner was alive. That's certainly not what he would have done. And although one is looking at genuinely original avenues, walkways, pathways from his work in the arts, he'd have been the last person to say, only keep to these, don't make it scriptural, my wording, because it's not. It's something to do with the spirit, not something to do with scripture. I mean, I'm very aware of all those things at the minute. I'm finally trying. This is why I was exhausted last Sunday. I'm finally there. Look, I'm getting tongue-tied as well. Finally trying to finish this bloody De Philos thing, which is to do heavy theology and art, and what the two have in common and what they don't have in common, because I think there's room and importance in both. And I'm a little worried at the moment. The theological bit is like reading a German textbook, which of course will have there's no panel in the world that will pass that, because they won't keep their sanity if they read through it. So I'm trying, well, how can I rewrite that? So I'm going through that and it's killing me, basically. And also looking at certain paintings, which I wanted to do. And so, maybe there's there's really more than the sum of the parts to these depictions, and that's what we've got to look at, and that's what theology can never look at, and yada yada yada. No, creativity is that which allows us to make connections where we wouldn't have allowed them to even be envisaged previously to that. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking of is also, as you know, we're putting on this Nephilim anthropology thing for the 3rd time in October. We're trying to include new materials, including urban legends, excuse me, like this awful, what's it, thin man, skinny man, what is it, slender man? And of course, anyone that thinks urban myths are trivial has forgotten the fact that murders have been committed in that entity's name, which is mind-boggling. I mean, is it some sort of demonic force, energy? Yes. But was it that originally, or was it something that demonic energies used to their own advantage? Terrifying. We're also looking at Dogman. My trouble with American society, and I think everybody knows I don't have many. That wonderful country does so many wonderful things, even now. You know, my trouble is it doesn't really have a shared folklore. So it tends towards science fiction. I think I've said this before, in my view, as a sort of body of shared and inherited stories. So you don't really get werewolves as such. You get dogmen. We're trying to include the dogman. We discovered some footage the other day of some dogman chasing a car up a road. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. What does it show? It shows that the spirit of creativity is multi-leveled, multi-dimensional. It's constantly building bridges. It's constantly making new facts, unearthing new insights. It's something we simply can't do without and ignore our peril. You know, I'm worried by the modern academy, whereby reductive materialism is the be-all and end-all, for 2 reasons. I mean, okay, there is so much now unexplained by your own admission that it's really not worth considering. And it's horror at the level, you know, it's horror at the world of creatives, because that cannot be held down. It cannot be categorized. It will not take the same form all the time. It will do what it will do. The spirit of Mercury, as the old alchemists would have said, you know, and until you manage to fix it in your own particular way, to affix it, then it will be a nightmarish, but it will also lead to paradise along the way. Yeah, creativity, the creative in Mahayana Buddhism, of course, is the step below the Bodhisattva. And I think if we look at it in terms of Christian art and those glorious things that have never been repeated in any other way or by any other cultural current, and I'm including very clearly Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy in that, all of a sudden we're looking at people trying to depict and trying to paint and trying to put concepts of the transcendental into music, into poetry, into plays. And, you know, the whole thing becomes almost giddying with this divine intoxication that we simply need more of. Before I came on the show, as I was rushing to get to the show today, I happened to see by accident Secular Sunday. I can't understand Secular Sunday. You know, everybody's in a drunken haze, a hungover haze from the night before. They potter around, you know, like zombies. I mean, what's the joy in that? And it won't feel like a Sunday because you've not been to church, you've not had a family row because you're in a zombie-like state. No, there was a perfect alternative picture. A group of youngsters, and there's nothing wrong with parties, and this huge get-together where what's the new habit? They throw coloured paint at each other and get heavily drunk. That's not the new habit. And I was thinking, yeah, okay, do that. Do those things and have a great time. But why do you have to do them at the expense of other parts of your nature, like the spirituality, the religiosity, like the creativity? Why not embrace all of it instead of just some of it? And of course, that leads us back to notions of the holy and the continuum, which I think really is what Steiner is getting at, from what I understand of that cycle of talks. I'm handing back to you, John.
Yeah, And yeah, Oswald's right. Today is actually a holiday, and old British holiday, at least for a time. And that's Oak Apple Day or Royal Oak Day. It's a Chick Shack Day or Oak and Nettle Day. But it had to do with the restoration of the Stuart monarchy in May of 1660. So that today, that's the festival, which is interesting because the festival of coming of the festival of Whitsun in 1971 was which Whitsun is the festival of Pentecost, the British festival, and they replaced it in 1971, I believe it was in the 70s. They replaced it with a bank holiday, and so, and there you have that mercantilism impulse that's so strong out of England that's taken even further in Americanism, as Rudolf Steiner described. But the understanding of this impulse, wait a minute, I clicked on the wrong thing. But Rudolf Steiner says in reading modern socialism, in reading modern socialistic publications, one finds, if certain differences are left out of account, a great similarity between them and the writings which express the standpoint of the Catholic Church, although the latter are differently expressed and deal with different realms. For instance, I recently read to you out of a certain brochure notice the kind of thought it expresses as thought forms. Compare what is said there with the rabid tendencies, whether cultured or not, which led gradually to Bolshevism. And compared to the beginning of the publication by Trotsky or Lenin, you'll find the same thoughts. One is the development of the other. Nowhere does one get a stronger feeling of Catholicism than in reading certain dogmatic socialist utterances, but something which Catholicism forbids. Philosophizing about certain things has become a passion, a principle, the principle of declaring that all learning comes from the bourgeoisie and all spiritual development from class warfare. This principle is the effect of the Catholic principle. Bolshevism may perhaps, in the form of its inception, have only a short existence, but all mankind will have to reckon long enough with what stands behind. Anyone who knows how it all hangs together would not be surprised that Bolshevism should have dawned in the place where this way of thinking, in the bestial course it has followed, proceeded under the cover of the Orthodox religion, so that the two streams were entirely separate. We must fathom all these things if we want to be conscious of the necessity for approaching the spiritual life in the right way. And I'll cut it off there. There's much more, but it's that whole idea of turning it into a courtroom and turning your life into this legalistic realm of the abstract, which again is attempting to describe an image of the sense impressions. And so, whereas the Bolshevists will say there is no soul and spirit, we're just, this whole meat suit that's it. When you're gone, the lights go out, and that's it. You don't know anything. Whereas in the church, they're telling you that don't go looking for that. We're your intermediaries to that which is represented by soul and spirit. And so, which leads all the way back to 869 AD, where they put into law within the church that a human being was a being of body and soul, but that there was no human spirit, and that the spirit was the result of that which is being offered to the parishioners from the church. and that we weren't a threefold being, like St. Paul said, you know, being of body, soul, and spirit. And then that came even further in 1869. So you go from 869 to 1869 with the papal injunction that was put forward that we are not even that developed, that taking the soul realm away too. And so you have, and most recently with Pope Francis, he vacated his role as defender of the faith. I mean, just a couple of years ago, it's like, what's the point of that? So and basically what that's saying is that the church is ultimately, and not to speak against all the many good Catholics out there that are sincere and have the right motivations and all of that, but the superstructure, the Roman superstructure of the church has become this kind of glorified real estate company. That's what they are. It's like they're entering into this whole melding with the socialism, so that what the words that Rudolf Steiner shared, you know, more than 100 years ago, are proving even more true than they were when he said it.
Well, it's not often I go against Big R or yourself, but obviously I'm going to at this juncture. Where do I start with all that? I went to Moscow in 1996, 86, 96. 86, forgive me. It was a communist country still in those days. There was only one way in, and that was through Intourist, the only official tourist company. And Aeroflot was the only flight evil Westerners were allowed to use, the only air service. I have a number of adventures to talk about when it's to do with Intourist and Aeroflot. But I think that might be a different point. I mean, obviously all of our guides were party members, because that was just how you got forward in life. The first thing I noticed was an incredible thirst, an incredible interest in spirituality amongst all of the communists. They didn't like traditional language. They felt that had a political edge to it. Therefore, they wouldn't have used theological or religious terms, but they used parapsychological terms. Therefore, the spiritual impulse hadn't been dulled or driven out of them. It had simply taken a different form. And if you would ask them about those things, they would say, like, okay, a certain monastery was attacked by the Bolsheviks because it was made into an arms dump. Therefore, the minute it took part in the revolution, one way or the other, it lost its neutrality. I think we've got to be very careful of caricatures mistaken for broad brushstrokes. Certainly, if we look at the Bolsheviks, they were one type of communist. No one ever talks about the Mensheviks, which were internationalist and highly educated, and lost power in various votes in their what do they call it? I can't remember. Commitants. They lost various votes, but there was more than one type. And it's more than arguable that there was a real spirituality behind all of that revolutionary zeal. Yes, they equated traditional religion with capitalism, and the Russian church, sorry, I'm tired after earlier, forgive me, everyone. The Russian church did its best to live up to that. I mean, it took sides from the word go and wouldn't negotiate with anybody. And therefore, a caricature is painted in this part of the world, which anyone acquainted with that part of the world knows simply isn't the full case. And with great respect to Dr. Steiner, maybe he should have gone to those countries before writing those things, because he would have seen a very different, he had a very different view. Yeah.
Well, and that goes to what I just said, because if that's what you're getting from what he said. You're not understanding what he's saying in a larger context, because it's really the spiritual future is very much tied into the Slavic folk soul and that whole sixth period. But we're still in the fifth period, but yet that striving, the consciousness soul. The challenge is to be able to spiritualize the consciousness soul through developing our relationship to the realms of soul and spirit, so that it's just not a material, sense, abstract realm of being. And so it's the transformation of the consciousness soul into the spiritual soul. And that is facilitated by the morphology of the actual brain structure that occurred in the age of the Archangel Gabriel that led up to 1879 in November, when Michael became the time spirit of our age, our archangelic period. There's 7 archangels go through these ages of development. And Rudolf Steiner makes a point, and it's something that half of my book is devoted to the subject, basically my first book. And that's that whole understanding of the way in which cyclical activity, astronomical cycles, and chronological cycles, and how all of this fits together, the mystery of number, as it relates to the mystery of the logos, because they're both working within that old sun, future Venus evolution axis of development. And so these concepts are difficult to grasp for many people, because they want things to be presented the way they want them, so that they could fit it into the compartmentalization of their abstract thoughts. But Rudolf Steiner doesn't define things. And so to take a stand like you just did with a definitive look at what he said, that's the tendency that the artistic impulse helps us refrain from making. Because I can't tell you how many times over the 50 years or so of studying Steiner, you think, aha, I've just figured it out. And then all of a sudden they publish a new lecture cycle, and you realize that, no, it's actually the opposite of what you thought was the real, I won't say answer, but fulfillment of the riddle, so that you have this ongoing description of a living thing rather than this kind of dead concept. And yes, of course, the Russian people themselves, they feel that they are of the earth itself. They're people of the soil. They are dwelling, the Russian folk soul is, Rudolf Steiner describes how it is pertaining to the realm of the sunlight as it reflects on the earth, which is really quite a wonderful image. And so you have this idea that it is of the light, but it's not directly facing the light, it's seeing the reflection of the light on our Mother Earth. And so that there's a beautiful, heartwarming aspect to that. And so that innate tendency within the Slavic folk soul is to want to find the spirit. That's their nature. Even if you don't have a form for them to do it in, they're still going to strive. So absolutely what you're saying, but that doesn't really contradict what Rudolf Steiner says, because if you go back to the early writings, you'll see that they are patently atheist, that they are straight up, fighting that battle. That doesn't mean that the people themselves are of the nature to relate to it in that way. And that's part of the beauty of all this, is that there is that kind of wiggle room that has to do with individual development, how one approaches any particular concept or view of things. And so, yes, one of the more significant transitions was the publication of the book Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. It came out back in 1970 by Sheila Ostrander and Lynn Schroeder. And in there, they describe in detail so much of the experimentation that was being done within the Soviet Union regarding the realms of the psychic and all that, and scientific experiments and studies in astral projection and all of that. So that it's something that you can't deny. And Rudolf Steiner says elsewhere that the source of many of the difficulties we have is that the beings of the spiritual world do not like to be ignored. And so if you go into a whole secular worldview and you don't address the realms of soul and spirit, you're just asking for challenges, because your worldview can only be fruitful to the extent that it participates in truth, because truth is the existence itself. And therefore, if your whole worldview is based on falsehood, well, it's gonna like run out of steam.
Yeah, I don't doubt that Rudolf Steiner is an addict, and I don't doubt what he says is true on that level. I don't have that view of that part of the world at all. As I say, it was always much more complex from what Western authorities said or wrote about. The terminology of the paranormal was born in the Soviet Union. They were trying to find a new vocabulary to talk about the spirit. They didn't want, for political reasons, to use the same terminology as the church. Therefore, how atheist is atheism and how reductive are the reductionists? Also, do they all think the same way all the time? No, I mean, books like Red Shambhala show that they were looking for these hidden cities in the Gobi Desert or beneath the Gobi Desert before the Germans, before the Nazis. They were trying to grapple with supersensible realities, albeit with a different vocabulary. And I think it's very incautious to think that any human movement has this sort of hive-like mentality. I mean, that's what certain so-called authorities in the West want us to think about that part of the world for their own ends. But, I think if one goes to that part of the world, that very soon falls apart. Yes, John?
Well, of course. I mean, come on. Let's not forget that Madame Blavatsky was Russian, right? She was of the von Hahn line, which made her a direct descendant of Rurik, the first Tsar of Russia. So that's a future realm of the spirit that can't be held back. I mean, if you go back to the time of the Bolsheviks, well, you have Nicholas Roerich, for example, who's artist and did so many, like even stage paintings for productions of operas and all the travels that he did in the East and the paintings that he did of Tibetan monks and all of that, and the Agni Yoga books of his wife and George Rourke, his son, who wrote about their travels. And there is all of that, but there's a decided character of that in it's part of the challenges coming to terms with the triune nature of God and the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And what does that mean? And so you have this innate tendency within Theosophy. And in fact, that's why Rudolf Steiner left the Theosophical Society, because he didn't agree with what was taking place, where they're saying that Krishnamurti is the reappearance of the Christ. He said, no, he left. He had to, because And even Krishnamurti himself walked away from it. He said, no, I'm not, that's not what I am, you know. And in fact, when Krishnamurti passed away, there was a copy of Rudolf Steiner's Philosophy of Freedom on his nightstand. See, so it's kind of interesting, but there was that tendency to try and conceive, and it has to do with who is Jesus Christ, you know. And in the Eastern view, he'd be described as, at the very most, an initiate, somebody who was a human being that went in advance of mankind in his development and was able to give certain teachings. And then there's the variations that, well, he wasn't even crucified, that there was a substitute crucified in his place, because if he really was that great, they would have never been able to pull it off crucifying him. So they missed the boat on that view. And that's that whole idea of that when you're presenting the concept of Christ as this something that is omnipotent, the concept of omnipotence does not include the necessity of acting in a certain way. And so that in having Christ from the high realm of the Trinity come to earth, take on human form, make the sacrifice, becoming purely human, and going through the mystery of Golgotha on behalf of all mankind in all earth evolution, that's completely different than that he's a highly developed human being that just is really good at explaining things, you know. And so it's a completely different perspective. And, you know, I have a lot of friends that is more their perspective. And if you get into the traditions that function in the West, you see that one of the largest traditions in the East is the Shivite tradition. It's something I've studied quite extensively, but Rudolf Steiner very specifically states that Shiva, as representative within the cult of the Shivites, represents that fallen Lucifer, the unredeemed Lucifer, the spirit of Venus, the astronomical Venus. And so you have that being that Christ was able to overcome in the first of the temptations quite readily, because he'd already, on Old Moon and Old Sun, through what he'd accomplished in those stages of planetary evolution, that made it possible for him to overcome the Luciferic impulse quite readily in the first temptation. And so you have this whole idea of Western culture receiving spirituality from the East. And mind you, most of the teachers from India that came to America to bring the teachings of the East were Shivites. They were yogis, right? And they're the guys that don't put any stock in that whole idea of the relationship of Christ to the ego, see? And so it's very interesting, because if you look at, like, the Brahmins, for example, like Rudolf Steiner, the way he spoke regarding T. Soubirous, who was a Brahmin who was around Blavatsky at the beginning of the writing of The Secret Doctrine. And she wanted him to help her write it, but he walked away. He didn't want to do it. He didn't, you know, he was of, we could say, of the right, in that the conservative, in wanting to keep the esoteric teachings in a small circle. So the Brahmins have the type of knowledge that was presented by Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine, but they don't give it out. And so you have this impulse of like the non-dual Advaita Vedanta, which is the highest expression, according to the views of spiritual science, of the wisdom of the East. But in that, you also have to respectfully add the stream, the Shivite stream of Abhinavagupta and Gaudapada and their non-dual approach, but keeping in mind what you're looking at, because it all has to do with what is your view regarding the causal body. And the causal body is that fifth principle that has to do with those aspects of the astral and the etheric that you carry from incarnation to incarnation. And so in somebody who's more highly developed, they have a more highly developed causal body, and it's apparent to any clairvoyant in their aura that it's articulated. And it's through the development of the causal body that one brings about the development of the chakras, and that's how your supersensible path of development unfolds. And so this is what we're looking at, is the development of the causal body is directly in relationship to this whole mystery of Pentecost.
Right, I'll just finish off my point with a personal anecdote, because it fits in with my plug for religion. Religion gets too much stick. The R word needs to be respected a lot more. When I was 86, I mean, when I was over there, our communist guide Tatiana took us all to Zagorsk, which is a citadel. It's a monastery the size of a castle. She wouldn't go in herself because she was a party member. She used to engage me every evening in conversations about the paranormal and spirituality. She didn't want to offend the old ladies by going inside this monastery, which all of us were very impressed by. When we actually got to the little wooden door in this gigantic monastery, we opened it, and it was like walking into paradise. As far as the eye could see in every direction, there was nothing but silver and gold, sparkling in candlelight with the rising and falling Russian Orthodox choruses for the prayers of that particular time of the day. It was like walking into paradise. Therefore, I think it's too easy to caricature that part of the world as one thing as opposed to many things in dialogue, and oftentimes in schism, but in dialogue. And that leads me to Catholicism. Okay, what is a Catholic and what's not a Catholic? Orthodox means traditional, the correct way. I don't know where they got that from. It doesn't strike me that they're living as first century Jews, but there we are. Whereas Catholic, of course, means universal. To take Rome as the definitive example of Catholicism is simply wrong. Yes, I mean, it's the form we know best because there are so many Roman Catholics compared to other types of Roman Catholic, other types of Catholic. But it's not, right, there's an army over there and there's a small group of guys over there. That group is loudest, but that doesn't mean they speak for everybody. And certainly the types of Catholicism, independent Catholicism, liberal Catholicism, mystical Catholicism that developed outside of Europe simply can't be addressed in that way. So, when is someone a Catholic? When is not someone a Catholic? And even in the Roman Church, it's simply unfair because of the endless bad press they get nowadays. They have enemies. It's not neutral reportage. They have enemies. And I'm not defending them. I mean, a lot of the attacks are genuine and true. And what the Roman Church has forgotten, the first part of the formula: contrition. You admit there's a problem, you apologize, and then atone. They've forgotten the formula. But to suddenly write off armies, not one or two, armies of good priests, nuns, religious workers that just get on with their job and don't court publicity and are never mentioned because there's never a fuss, there's never a ruckus, there's never a problem. They just live their vocation day in and day out, despite all the negative press. A beautiful image, despite the negative press thundering around them. I mean, a perfect example was that recent unmarked cemetery of children in Canada. That was the perfect example. Unmarked, the graves of the kids in this nunnery, by a nunnery that had looked after orphan children, were unmarked. Therefore, all of a sudden, from that fact, this was a nunnery of baby killers. Where did that come from? And I actually knew some of the members of the press who'd gone there to find out the stories for themselves. I can't remember offhand the particular nunnery, but I'm sure everybody watching this will remember it in an instant. I can look it up. What had actually happened was that they'd originally put wooden crosses. They couldn't afford anything else. If you're clergy, you know, you're not in the sort of Jackie Onassis tax bracket. You know, you're lucky to be able to pay your bills at the end of the month because that's what you sign up to. So they'd originally put wooden crosses over all the little graves. Wood doesn't last that long. They'd petitioned on a number of occasions the local authority that they were part of to mark these graves in a more solemn and lasting way. The local authority wouldn't do it because they were anti-Catholic and kept moaning about the expense. And that's why the graves were unmarked. They couldn't afford it, and the local civic secular authority simply wouldn't do it. That's the mystery solved. And I asked one of the journalists, well, is it that simple? And was told yes. But, you know, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So all of a sudden, instead of...
If that's true, you know, again, I don't know.
Well, I'm working on the basis that most people are not monsters. I mean, if you work on that basis, how do I know you're not a serial killer? You know, I mean, human beings can't work on that level.
I had cereal yesterday with bananas.
I'd like a good old-fashioned English fry-up. Oh, I love bananas. I love bananas. No, I mean, you know, are we made in the image of God or not? Yes. What does that mean? Most people are decent. Most people are decent. And the greatest heroes in our society are unsung. They never reach the press. They're never the subject of gossip. They're never pointed out for anything apart from the fact, because of the fact, they just get on with their job. They say their prayers and they live the witness they were called to. You know, in a society degenerating into endless name calling, we've really got to be careful of taking fun in the wrong way, because we're led to nowhere. I mean, our society's on the verge of collapsing anyway, but, you know, let's not rush the process too quickly, because who are the likely contenders to take over the moral tutelage of the world? I mean, basically, Russia can't do it, as we've all seen recently. So it's China. I mean, my heavens. I mean, is that really the direction of history we all want? And that's not to say everyone's in China's a bastard. It is to say that you have to be careful, careful of name calling and what it means. And the R word needs a big push at the minute. I'll tell you, to round off that particular ramble, what's on my mind in that sphere at the minute. I'm rather fond of the New Age. I can't see anything wrong in waggling around a few crystals and talking about ley lines. I mean, what's wrong with that? Great. You know, and some of the crystals are pink. I just love them, darling, in my front room. You know, I mean, you know, so they all do a Sangha yoga. You know, they talk endlessly about the Upanishads. They've never read them, but they talk endlessly about them. And, you know, great. What's wrong with that? But I've noticed it's not, I mean, the church is flat on its back at the minute, as I say. And that's partly majorly the church's fault, because it's adulterous. We've adulterated our attitude to the mysteries. And the New Age is now the recipient of these unmitigating attacks, because certain people in our world at the moment simply don't want spirituality discussed at all. Therefore, nowadays, the New Age is being reduced to having a good massage or the feel-good factor of taking a breath of fresh air on a jog over the weekend. We've really got to all grow up and realize there is a war going on between the good and the bad. And unless we all start making bridges between each other, we will actually be on the receiving end for a very long karmic time indeed. Handing back to you, John. And I love the picture of the saint, by the way.
Yes, so there you have it. And in my mind, Reverend David has never been at a loss for words, and so it's healthy that we get the response such as it is, but keeping in mind that what Rudolf Steiner provided were characterizations of particular cultural streams, and the difficulty in that is that you want to try and make that applicable to individuals, and discussing the individual is a very different subject. You know, like for example, when he gets into the character of the British folk soul as being commerce. Well, yeah, the basic, that's what's going on over there. City of London.
That one is true.
Yeah.
That one is true.
Well, that's because you're there. See, it's you have to acquiesce. And then when you get into the kind of the sensuality of the sentient soul of the Italian people, well, you can see that. I mean, a very touchy feeling and all that. But that doesn't mean all, Italians or this or that. And just as the British thing doesn't mean all British or this or that, or the American or the French with the intellectual soul. And so they dwell in the political realm. And so that the French Revolution logically was something that arose out of France, because they're in that legalistic mindset of philosophy and law and that whole intellectual realm. And then, but if you get into the German impulse, you see how poorly they've done thus far in taking up the task, because they're the realm of the ego, the individual human ego, and the realm of warmth. So you have that represented by the German Romanticists, for example, that arose out of with the Schlegels and Novalis and Goethe and Herder and Lessing and this whole constellation of people. And you go, well, how well is Germany bolstering that impulse at the present time? And of course, you'd want to look to worldwide Waldorf education as being an expression of that, and which is interesting because of the new book by Daniela Irendust on Waldorf education, which came as a complete surprise to me. I haven't seen it as of yet, but yeah, there it is, on the philosophy of education towards an anthroposophical view. And that's a wonderful thing, and that's available on Amazon. And since we're talking about books, here's Reverend David's first book, The Grammar of Witchcraft, which is a Shakespearean study. That's available on Amazon. And his Shakespearean-esque poetry, Caliban's Redemption, and his major work is Mount Athos Inside Me. Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, and that's edited by the very talented Daniela Irendust. And these are all available on Amazon, and I highly recommend them, as is the book of Daniela Irendust on the philosophy of education towards an anthroposophical view by Daniela Irendust. And so that being said, I had something here. Here it is. And I also want to, I needed to bring that up. It's hard for me to remember all this stuff sometimes, especially I haven't been here in a few weeks in this capacity. But I have my own books too, and that's the Arcana of the Grail Angel, the Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order, as a forward by my best buddy Douglas Gabriel, and is loaded with diagrams and the complete series of diagrams that are based upon some diagrams that crossed my desk many years ago. They were hand-drawn by Aaron Pfeiffer, the founder of biodynamic gardening. And so those are the Grail diagrams, and they give you the cosmological aspects of spiritual science. The full series of diagrams is in Arcana of Light on the Path. Plus, I added a whole bunch more. So if you want to get all the diagrams, you have to get this second volume, and to get the commentary, you need to get first volume. But either one, they're both available on eBay from myself directly. If you're outside the US, you can order them through contacting me on private message on Facebook, or there's an academia link below that you can contact me through. But in any regards, so we've been busy, and however many times. And I also want to acknowledge the contributions of friends of this podcast that make it possible. It's been made possible by the generous support of Tyla and Vadim and Vivian and Neil and Christian and Mark and Maud and Drewman and Laura and Paula and Rick, Michael, Beth, and Ishtar, and so many others over the years. And I want to thank you all for supporting our humble efforts. And so there, I think I did most of it, except that if you want to buy us a cup of coffee, you can go to paypal.me/dparry777 or paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. So there, I think I actually was somewhat responsible. Oh yeah, you can click like and subscribe to this channel. That's the thing. It's a lot of stuff to remember. But thankfully, I have Reverend David here to help me out. So we're drawn to the end of the podcast, and as is the tradition, and in leading into the festival of the Pentecost, if we could have Reverend David share a prayer with us to consecrate our efforts. Of course, he may have some comments he wants to make beforehand.
9 times out of 10, I've always got a few comments to make. Yeah, one last comment. I mean, I think Steiner is completely right about folk souls. I do think they exist. That doesn't mean he's a racist, as some people are willfully trying to say at the minute. I do think the concept of folk souls is incredibly complex. So I have very little to say about them until I learn a lot more from Rudolf Steiner about what he means by that. But certainly the idea is very solid to me. It makes complete sense. I just think we've got to be careful of what that might mean, you know, how these entities influence whole epochs. We've got to be careful at simplifying that. Secondly, I think, yeah, there are certain natural links in this part of the world between religion and certain types, normally very light socialism. I think that's because my lovely Yankee friends grew up in a land of the brave and the home of the free, and don't realize what it's like growing up under a monarchy. You'll never be king, you'll never be queen, you'll never be an aristocrat. Get on with your job, shut up. That's why there tends to be a socialist backlash in the continent of Europe, because we're all sick of it. Therefore, we've got to be careful about just thinking there's a taint going on to the hive mind. Actually, it's an anger wanting more freedom and a bit more respect, which I think every human being on this earth is worth. I'll just say one more thing before the prayer. The real argument, of course, starts after Elizabeth II passes. I'm not someone wishing her a quick demise. She's an extraordinary professional, I will say that. I'm not a monarchist, as everybody knows, but she's an extraordinary professional. She's been a very competent head of state. The real argument starts the minute she's gone. Why do we need a monarchy? That's when things get very, very interesting in Britain indeed. But let's pray for each other, my friends. In a time of rapid change, in a time that looks on the surface as though we're regressing, but holds all the golden nuggets of a future promise. Let's remember each other in humility and truth. Let's remember our humanity. Let's remember our commonality and our calling. And may the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit that spoke in tongues of fire to the apostles all the way back at the original Pentecost, light our way ahead and fire us with an even greater zeal to understand the truth divine ahead. God bless you all until we meet again.
Amen. Well, thank you all for dropping by, whether it's now or in some later review of our show. And Reverend David, thank you so much. And we'll see you next week.